Welcome everyone to 3 Count Commentaries. We're going to talk about Autopsy, the last hours of Andre the Giant. Alright, this is a very interesting episode of Autopsy because there's been so many documentaries on Andre the Giant. How do you bring in interesting new information? That's sort of the challenge here. How is it not just a repeat of all the other documentaries that have happened on Andre? And I think using some of the medical dialogue is probably what makes it different. And also, it's not really an investigation of how Andre died because we know how he died, but the effects of giantism on his body, I think that makes it very, very interesting. So let's get into it. Andre the Giant was 6'6" at 15 years old. He was later diagnosed with giantism, which is a genetic concern, and he grew to be around 7 feet tall. So this is going to be sort of the main contention, is how this affected his physical body. He began wrestling in 1971. He was still wrestling in December of 1992. He was wrestling in 6-man tags in Japan, which means he was still wrestling even after he had stopped wrestling in WWF. They determined that Andre was around 200 pounds overweight relative to his size, which of course means that he had a sort of massive bout with obesity. And he ate a lot. He obviously drank a lot. That's another thing from the mythology of Andre the Giant. But they talked about how later he switched from beer to wine. And it still takes a lot to get him drunk because of his size. But the alcohol consumption, the excessive amount of beers and things that he were drinking, was adding stress to his heart. So he died of a heart attack, and we're talking about him having an incredibly large frame, being obese, also maybe suffering from some alcoholism. And they also discussed stress, which, he had to live in a world that was too small for him, getting into cars that were too small, beds that were too small, being freakishly large and being recognizable, everybody seeing him. And this was, of course, a big issue for Andre. He was so different in the world. And I believe his friends also believe he suffered from some depression, especially in the later part of his life, due to the injuries starting to pile up and his inability to keep up in the ring. Later, he also suffered from severe osteoporosis, which is, his bones were essentially compromised. And this led to a lot of wear and tear injuries on him, specifically the broken ankle he suffered in the 1980s that led to him, one of the reasons why he ended up getting so large. And also the fact that he had spinal stenosis, which required for him to have back surgery. Everybody knows that Andre the Giant had a really bad back when he was filming The Princess Bride, and he was still wrestling at the same time. And his back was so bad that he could barely carry this like 110, 120 pound woman. And Andre was freakishly strong, especially for, considering his size. He could carry multiple small females if he wanted to. But in this particular instance, he had gotten so beat up and he had been so weakened by, his bones in his back that he could barely carry a woman who was literally like a quarter of his size. Now, not only did Andre have giantism, but he had something that was probably even worse for him, which was acromegaly. He was diagnosed with that in 1970. Now, acromegaly is the medical condition that gives him freakishly large hands and a freakishly large head. So he wasn't just tall, but he was also wide in certain places. And this was a hormonal disease that led to excess secretion of growth hormones and affected his metabolism, which led to overactive thyroid. And that also caused him to have difficulty regulating his weight, which of course led to a lot of his issues in terms of weight gain. And the weight gain also led to fluid buildup in his chest, which Dr. Michael Hunter called, what is this? A cardiac effusion, which of course means a lot of fluid around the heart. And the fluid around the heart was a response to his body gaining so much weight and being bloated. The acromegaly was a big problem, but he never really stopped growing, which, because he never got it treated. Big Show had acromegaly as well, and giantism, but he actually got treated for it. I believe Giant Baba also had it, but I believe he also was treated for it. But Andre wasn't. And since he was one of the first wrestlers really to have it, it was rare, and nobody really thought of it. There was another wrestler by the name of the French Angel. He also had acromegaly. He was known as being, sort of a freak. He had freakishly large hands, a freakishly large head. Also, that pro wrestler that was fired from WWE a couple of years ago, Lars Sullivan, he also had acromegaly. He wasn't as large as Andre the Giant, but he also had like a freakishly large head, freakishly large hands and feet. And that's one of the things that makes people stand out in wrestling. But standing out can be a positive, but it can also be a negative, because as Andre had to deal with, he was essentially living in a world that treated him like a zoo animal. Andre's friends and family discussed how his clothes were constantly too small, how clothes had to be specially made for him. I mean, this is, of course, all stuff that comes out of every documentary that has to do with Andre the Giant. But it was, especially put here because it was a cause of anxiety and stress, which led to him drinking more and actually taking painkillers a lot, which is something that also is not discussed quite a bit. In early 1992, WWF released Andre, which, he still wrestled later that year. But this led to a great bout of stress for Andre, because now wrestling is the only thing that he had, and the WWF was paying him a lot of money, and he didn't know what to do. And then, of course, later that year, his father passed away. So that causes a lot of the depression. So you got this guy's drinking a lot. He's eating too much. He's 200 pounds overweight. He can't regulate his body weight. He's got fluid buildup around his heart. There's just so much happening. And then his father dies. So now he's taking this emotional damage. And so Andre suffers from cardiomegaly, cardiomyopathy, which makes the heart pumping blood more difficult. And Dr. Michael Hunter, for some reason, even floated the idea that maybe Andre wanted to commit suicide, because he wanted to sell his ranch in North Carolina and move to Hawaii after he was retiring. And there, obviously, I deal in mental health. One of the things that is a red flag is if people start doing things that are out of character for them, that they might be trying to hurt themselves or considering hurting themselves. And the idea that he loved his ranch and he was considering selling it, and moving away, or just not wanting to live there anymore, and there not being any good reason why, it would raise some flags. But even I was like, what the hell? I never heard Andre the Giant was suicidal. But it is something to consider, because the guy was severely depressed. He was suffering from drinking too much, taking too many pills. His career had been taken away from him. He was still trying to work, but he was in such tremendous pain. And again, he's like a human elephant. Everybody wants to take pictures with him, and the world is not fit for a guy like Andre. And if you take everything into account, you see why it's a little outrageous that Andre might want to kill himself. But people have killed themselves for less. At the end of the day, he's still a human being, right? And his mental health is not the same as, somebody else's. Everybody handles these stressors very differently. And it was quickly kind of wiped away that Andre might have been suicidal, but it was tossed around that, he might have wanted to kill himself. Of course, he died of a heart attack. He didn't die of suicide. But I just thought, man, that was salacious. That was pretty salacious. But Andre is a very interesting medical case because a lot of the issues with him comes from his absolute enormous size. And to be quite fair, him not taking care of himself, you know, and just watching this episode, you feel really bad for him. But I don't think the episode adds enough that is different from other Andre the Giant documentaries to be a must watch. But it was a fun way to spend about 40 minutes. So if you're a really dedicated fan of Andre the Giant, it might be a good way to spend 40 minutes. All right. Thanks you guys for your time. I'll talk to you folks later. Peace out.